are together a lot. And then also, it's not necessarily to rebut a mitigating circumstance, but as to relevancy as to its culpability and as to Travion and Ronald acting independently of one another. And there's been some talk already that Ronald was controlling Travion, and I don't believe that Mr. McCollum would say that one was higher than the gang or anything like that, that Ronald Anthony was a leader of the gang and Travion Smith was just a soldier in the gang, but they were relatively of equal footing.
All right. So let me make sure I understand. So with respect, say, for example, to acting in concert, theory of the case, that you're saying with respect to the jury's determination that there's a common plan or scheme, it is relevant to, it is circumstantial evidence that two members of a gang would form a common plan or scheme that would not necessarily be one's plan and the other just a unknowing or unwilling follower. I'm just trying to articulate in the legal theories of this case so that I understand exactly what you're suggesting.
Yes, sir. I mean, I think in an acting in concert that these gang members working together for, you've got the break-ins, the car break-ins. They're doing that together, then breaking into the lower apartment, and then moving on up, and then going forward. So I think that their affiliation as gang members and doing everything together would be relevant to the acting in concert theory.
All right. Ms. Davis.
Well, just a couple things, Your Honor. One is that as far as the acting in concert, I mean, there has to be some nexus between their gang membership and the crime itself for the evidence of their gang membership to somehow be evidence of them acting in concert because of, am I making any sense? I mean, there's never been any suggestion that anything about this crime was related to gang activity or gang involvement. The jury is well aware of the fact that there's a friendship, a relationship between these two individuals, and they're living in the same house. They're, by all accounts, together, a tremendous amount of the time around this time period, and so there's no other probative value of knowing that they were members of a street gang when the relationship is well established through innumerable other mechanisms. And there's no relationship between the facts of the crime and gang membership. There's no suggestion that somebody in the gang said you should do this. I mean, people think about gang crimes as being initiation crimes or crimes to, make money that you've got to send up the chain for the higher ups in the gang, or you've got to make your, the amount of money you're required to make per week, or anything like that. And there's never been any suggestion of any of those things being true in this case. So what there is there's a relationship between these two individuals because they're friends, and that's the relationship that this crime grew out of. This crime did not grow out of their relationship in Peru.
I do believe that one of the theories or one of the themes of the opening statement of the defense was some sort of controlling type relationship between Mr. Anthony controlling Mr. Smith, that Mr. Smith was a follower, that Mr. Anthony was the one who was the dominant figure. And if what the state is seeking to elicit is that they were both co-equal members of a gang, and that seems to be probative of the nature of that relationship. I mean, it would be equally probative if Mr. Anthony was a leader of the gang and Mr. Smith was a new initiate. I mean, so I think in the same sense the state is entitled, based on the theory as I understand of the defense, to establish that to the extent that these two gentlemen engage in conduct, they're co-equals in an organization.
Well, I'd like to come back to that because there were three things I wanted to say, Your Honor. One was my main argument that I just made about the fact that there's nothing about the crime itself that's related to any sort of gang membership. The other thing that I wanted to sort of highlight at this point was that even in the state's argument, they said that his culpability is increased because of gang membership, which is exactly the danger of that evidence being admitted. And even in their argument about why it should be relevant in this case, they're identifying the precise danger of it being admitted. But the final thing I wanted to say, Your Honor, is that this is the first I've heard of Mr. McCollum being a possible source of information about Piru. So if, in fact, Mr. McCollum, first of all, Mr. McCollum's already testified he had never met Travion Smith until that day, didn't know who he was, didn't know anything about him, we have all of the prior statements he has made in this case. He's not from this area originally. He's older than these people. He doesn't have any involvement in any street gang organization in North Carolina. So he has that we're aware of. So again, if that's something that they have knowledge of, we don't know that up to this point in this trial. So if he is somebody who they're going to elicit that evidence from, then that's something that's discoverable that we've not been told about.
Mr. Waller, on that last point, what's the state's position?
If you recall, when I asked about Captain Limper being the substitute witness in his statement, he says, Mr. McCollum says that these are the Piru gang members that were involved in Wake Forest. So, I mean...
And he does know Ronald Anthony and has for a year, and does know that he is a member of Piru, and might very well assume that, you know, Travion Smith is as well. But he doesn't have any awareness, as far as we know, of their status or how long they'd been members or their relative roles within the gang. So in terms of that being anything that would be elicited as part of the evidence in this trial, that's something... Absolutely. There's a spontaneous statement in front of the officers when he's arrested, something to the effect of, this must be about those damn Piru from Wake Forest. That's it. So that's certainly not enough for us to be able to intuit that he would therefore be a source of inside information about people's relative roles and status inside a specific street gang. Particularly since he has testified, and it's clear from all the prior statements, that the only person he had any prior knowledge of was Ronald Anthony.
All right. Well, I'll allow a brief voir dire of this witness to determine what his knowledge of gang status of both Mr. Anthony and Mr. Smith are. Go ahead, Mr. Waller.
Mr. McCollum, are you aware that if Mr. Ronald Anthony and Mr. Travion Smith are in a gang?
Yes, I am.
All right. What gang is Ronald Anthony a member of?
It's called Piru.
Piru. And do you know if Travion Smith is also a member of Piru?
I'll say it like this. As far as my incarceration after the fact, yes, he is.
Okay. And
I mean, once you go to prison and you learn about people, you know what they're involved in. It's inevitable. You're going to know.
So you didn't learn about... When did you first learn of Travion Smith being a member of Piru?
I mean, the colors that he wore when he was at my house tells you that I knew that he was a Piru. He's wearing burgundy. That's their colors, period, point blank.
And do you know of any relationship in terms of whether Ronald Anthony was higher in the gang or whether Travion Smith was in the higher in the gang or the general hierarchy?
I don't know anything about the hierarchy. I don't even know if this case is involved about a Piru gang or if it had any ties to it. But I know that they were both in a Piru gang.
Excuse me. Sorry. And Mr. McCollum, to be clear about the statement that you made to some officers after you were arrested, did you say kind of what Ms. D said?
No, I never said anything to that sort. Nothing about Piru at all.
You did.
I said that it has to be something to do with these damn laptops. Not about a Piru guys or anything in Wake Forest. Okay. Just about the laptop.
All right. I'm going to sustain the objection just based on the voir dire. I want to make it clear that I certainly can see circumstances where gang affiliation is relevant for the reason I articulated of the theory that was set out in the opening statement. But I'm sustaining the objection based on this witness's personal knowledge with respect to this defendant's involvement and his degree of involvement in a gang. I think he probably is competent to testify about membership or affiliation with the gang based upon a lay opinion. But as I think the critical inquiry is status within that gang and particularly status within the gang on the night in question, I think would be a more relevant inquiry for the reasons I gave earlier. But that would be the basis of my objection. I'm not ruling on the broader objections that you made with respect to gang evidence in general.
I understand. And so as far as this moment and this witness goes, I just would like to understand that Your Honor is saying that as far as this witness goes, you find that he doesn't have any basis for knowledge about their relative positions or anything along those lines. And he, I believe, has just told us that his only knowledge of Mr. Smith's, I mean, he could make a guess based on the color burgundy, but that would still, I mean, that's what you're saying, he can, but everything about what he's learned after he's incarcerated is obviously not admissible.
Go ahead.
I'm going to leave it alone.
Right.
If that simplifies the situation.
That's fine. Let's leave it that way then, and we'll revisit it if it comes up at a later time. All right. Let's go ahead and bring jurors in, please. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. Further questions, Mr. Waller?
Yes, sir. May I approach?
Yes.
Mr. McCollum, I'm approaching you with what has previously been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibits number 38 through 41. If you'll take a look at those photographs, tell me if you just take a moment and look at them and tell me when you're ready to identify them. You recognize those photographs, Mr. McCollum?
3 of them I do, yes, sir.
All right, which 3 do you recognize?
This one, and this one.
All right, and how do you recognize those photographs?
Those are the pictures that were sent to me through Amber's phone, Amber Albert's phone.
Okay. And they appear to be the photographs that you used to generate the Craigslist posting?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any changes or alterations to those?
No, sir.
I'm going to hand you what has been previously introduced in the evidence as State's Exhibit 37. If you'll take a look at State's Exhibit 37, if you and tell me if you recognize that document.
This is my Craigslist ad, and yes.
And now looking at your Craigslist ad, do you also recognize State's Exhibit number
Yes, sir.
39?
Yes, sir.
So these 4 photographs, 38 through 41, are the photographs that were sent to you via text message?
Yes, sir.
And they're the ones that you used to generate this Craigslist ad?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the ad, you list the Lenovo orange laptop for $800. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, sir.
For? And then, Mr. McCollum, I want to show you what has previously been identified as State's Exhibit number 25, and actually 25A. You recognize that object, sir?
Yes, sir.
What is that object?
That is the Lenovo Gray Yoga 13 that Travion brought me.
Does it appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as when he brought it to your residence?
Yes, sir.
Any changes to that?
No,
to that
except the
box?
sticker on the top. That's it.
And when you say the sticker on the top?
The evidence sticker. That's the only thing that's different.
State's Exhibit number 24A, the orange laptop. It's in front of you here on the witness stand. Prior to today, had you ever seen that laptop?
No, sir.
Does this appear to be the same laptop as the laptop depicted in the photographs that were sent to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. To be clear, Mr. McCollum, did Ronald Anthony ever provide you with this laptop in any way?
No, sir.
Did you ever see him with it?
No, sir.
And in fact, the week of May of 2013 that we're talking about, did you ever even see Ronald Anthony?
No.
And State's Exhibit 25A is the laptop that Mr. Travion Smith brought to you?
Yes.
I want to show you a photo. I'm going to show you a photograph that has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 58. If you'll take a look at that photograph and tell me if you recognize what that photograph is.
This is my apartment.
And in that photograph of your apartment, do you see the silver laptop?
Yep, it's right next to my bed.
And when did you put that silver laptop there?
20 minutes after Travion left.
And does that photograph fairly and accurately represent the condition of your apartment and where the gray Lenovo laptop was on the morning that Travion Smith brought it to you?
Yes, sir.
Any changes or alterations?
No, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 58 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection to 58?
On screen.
It's allowed.
Your Honor, I'd ask to introduce 58 for illustrative purposes.
It's allowed.
Thank you, sir. Now, and if I may publish State's Exhibit 58 to the members of the jury using the screen.
Yes.
Mr. McCollum, behind you on the screen there, that State's Exhibit 58, the photograph that we just looked at. Can you point out to the members of the jury where that laptop is? In this room, is this the room that you and your fiance and children were residing in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. McCollum, you mentioned earlier that you were charged in relation to this case. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And at the time, sir, did you plead guilty to this charge and some other charges?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 59. Take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize what that document is, and take your time.
This is my plea deal for the cases that I had, which I have served my time on. It also consolidates the case that is here.
And this State's Exhibit 59, this plea transcript, is it signed by yourself and your attorney, Michael Howe?
Yes.
And another DA, Jeff Cruden, handled your case, and does his signature appear there?
Yes, sir.
Any changes or alterations to this plea transcript, Mr. McCollum?
No, sir.
And it appears that there is a certified true copy from original seal on this document. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 59 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It's allowed.
Pursuant to this plea agreement, Mr. McCollum, it says in 13 CRS 217906, which is a forgery charge, 13 CRS 218740, a speed to elude arrest charge, and 13 CRS 219122, which is a possession of firearm by felon charge, will be consolidated for one judgment with sentencing in the discretion of the court. Judgment in 13 CRS 211942 will be continued until at a later date, soon thereafter, as the state prays judgment, to give defendant an opportunity to testify truthfully in the cases against Ronald Anthony, Travion Smith, and Sarah Redden. Is that your plea agreement that you reached in regards to this case? Now, in regards to the forgery, speed to elude, and possession of firearm by felon, did you in fact receive a sentence in the case?
Yes.
What was that sentence, sir?
15 to 27 months.
Okay, and was that an active sentence?
Yes.
And did you have to serve that in the Department of Corrections?
Yes, I did.
In relation to this case and to this gray Lenovo laptop that you had in your possession on May 21st of 2013, you also pled guilty to that, right?
Yes.
And at this point, Mr. McCollum, have you received any sentence in regards to that case?
No.
Okay. Do you have an attorney on that case as well?
Mr. Howe.
And has he advised you on this matter and met with you in regards to this case? Thank you, Mr. McCollum. If I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes. Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
So I just want to go back and go through a few things. You mentioned towards the beginning of your testimony that the first time that Ronald contacted you, you were working in Goldsboro?
Correct. No,
And-
that was not the first time. That was the initial time about the laptops.
That's exactly what I meant to say.
Okay.
That was a much better way of phrasing the question. But he called when you were working in Goldsboro, and did you talk to them, or did he just leave you a message?
I talked to him briefly, probably about 3 or 4 minutes.
And that's when he told you that he had 2 computers that he was interested in having your assistance in selling.
Correct.
And was it in that initial conversation that you figured out that they really were kind of newer, more valuable? It was later.
Correct. It was probably a week later that I figured out that they were newer laptops.
Okay.
I believe that it was probably a ThinkPad Lenovo like this lady right here is sitting in front of.
Yes.
That's what I thought it was. So.
Yeah, they're popular on all these tables.
Yes.
So I want to follow up on that, because I believe you told us here today that your best memory now is because those were far more valuable computers, right?
Correct.
Which is why when you figured out that that's the type of computer or the type of computers that Ron was talking about, you were more interested in learning more.
Correct.
And I believe you told us, and there were some red flags that you had at different points throughout this process, correct?
Correct.
Just in general, Ron having such valuable computers was a little bit of a red flag.
Yes.
And the fact that the person who wanted to purchase the computer from Craigslist was willing to offer you your asking price was a red flag.
Yes.
And then later you were also a little bit concerned because Travion seemed to be willing to sell the computer for far less than it was worth. Is that
Correct.
right? But you felt like it was still something where you could make a decent, return on money.
I felt that Ronald was trustworthy enough where he wouldn't put me in a position where it was stolen. So I trusted and said, well, okay, I'll do it. Had purchased things from him previous, and they all went well. So I had no worries, but the bells were going off in my head.
Right. And he was someone who you liked enough and trusted enough to just ignore the bells.
Correct.
And I just wanted to go back briefly to the question of the amount of money that you discussed with Travion, according to your earlier statements to the police. And I believe you told us a couple things here today, and I know this was a really long time ago, but you said one was that you didn't really remember talking about the price very much with Travion when he was there at your apartment that day.
Correct.
But to the best of your memory, you thought maybe the two of you had talked about a price of about $150.
I believe it was more in the 250 range, but the person that I had really talked about this with was Ronald.
Ron. Okay.
It really wasn't Travion.
So you thought that maybe Travion had some information from Ron.
Correct.
Do you remember talking to you were interviewed that day at Atlantic Avenue,
Yes.
and you talked to Detective Falk?
Yes.
And do you remember Detective Falk asking you questions about what amount of money you had agreed upon?
I believe he did.
And do you remember giving Travion $50 up front?
Yes, I do.
And telling him that he could get another $150 at the end of the week?
Not at the end of the week when the laptop was sold.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if it was $150. I can't be sure on those prices anymore.
And do you remember telling Detective Falk that that you had told Travion you would make 2 additional payments to him so that the total price that he would be paid was $400?
Not sure, but I do recall something of that sort. I can't remember my exact words, but I believe that it may have been in that range.
Do you think that if you had a chance to look at a report that summarized your interview with Detective Falk, it might help you to remember a little bit better, refresh your recollection about the details of that conversation?
It could be a possibility.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. McCollum, we're going to show you what I've just put a label on marking it as Defense Exhibit 8. And it's just, so Mr. McCollum, I know you didn't type that, but can you take a minute and read that second short paragraph? You can just read it to yourself.
Okay. Yes, this is correct.
And you remember having this conversation that day with Detective Falk?
Yes.
And upon reading that and having your recollection refreshed, you remember telling Detective Falk that you had given Travion $50 initially and that you were going to give him $200 on Friday and $400 total after the laptop sold.
Correct.
When the person who called you about the computer and wanted to pay you what you were asking in your Craigslist ad, did that person ask you some questions about where the computer came from?
No.
You don't remember having any of that conversation with him?
I believe that he did ask me something about if it was mine, and I told him that I was on workman's comp and it was mine. I did tell him something of that sort, I do recall.
Probably partly because those bells were going off.
Yes. I mean, it was just to keep it as subtle as possible for the person that's buying, you know.
Now, I want to ask you just a few questions. You had known Ron for, I believe you told Mr. Waller that you had known him since the July prior.
Yes.
And that the two of you, I mean, that basically like you just liked Ron.
Yes, I took an interest in him. He had a child that was identical to the same age as mine. He had a newborn son at the point in time when I met him in July. My son was born July 11th, so I had a brand new son, and he had a brand new daughter. They were probably 20 days apart, and that took a great interest in me, that he was a young father trying to, do something better with his life. And I exchanged phone numbers with him, told him to keep in contact.
And you had other mutual friends you met through other...
Not
no?
at all.
You
This,
just
I met
at
him
the
in a hotel, walking down the hotel aisle, going to a room. I met him, and we hung out outside the doors for a minute, talked, and exchanged numbers. That was it. I never saw him again after that for months.
And then the two of you ended up both living in Wake Forest.
Exactly.
And that's how come you basically ran into him in
Yes.
Wake Forest.
I ran into him in Walmart with Amber.
Okay.
And that's how we met again and exchanged Amber's phone number. And we started talking again.
And so it was after you ran into him again in Wake Forest that you had those approximately 10 times that you had hung out with him.
Exactly.
And you had sold some things, helped him sell some things on Craigslist at least one time previously.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, he and Amber were living together in Wake Forest. Is that right?
Correct.
So, and they were living together in Wake Forest until not too long before when this happened.
Exactly. As far as I recall, they were still living in Wake Forest when this incident happened. I'm not sure if Ronald per se was staying in this household in Wake Forest, but Miss Amber was.
Okay. So you never knew them to be staying somewhere in Oxford. You always
No.
knew them to be in Wake Forest.
Wake Forest. Unless that borderline over there where they stay turns into Oxford.
Okay.
That's the only way that I would think that they are in Wake Forest and they may be in Oxford.
Okay. But you knew them together at a household not that far from you for a while.
5 minutes in Wake Forest away. Yes.
Okay. And there weren't that many people up in Wake Forest that you had a whole lot in common with.
I had no people that I was tied to in Wake Forest at all.
And you had your fiance at the time and your children, but you didn't have a large friend network beyond that.
No.
Because you didn't move to North Carolina that long ago.
I moved to North Carolina in August of 2011.
Okay. So he was one of the people that you connected with during your time here.
Yes.
And you told us a little bit about his demeanor that you observed after he was arrested.
Correct.
And you talked about him seeming, I think you said, distraught.
Yes.
And that was, again, after he had been charged with the first-degree murder.
Correct.
And you hadn't seen him during that week prior, had you?
No.
But you had spoken to him on the phone more than once?
More than once, yes.
And was he distraught during any of those prior calls?
No. His attitude, not even attitude per se, but just his actions were moving. He was moving too much. I told him that there's possibility he's going to jail. He's doing too much.
He
Told
seemed,
him
he
just
seemed
like that.
antsy,
Yes.
but not distraught.
Not distraught.
And you didn't, I know you've told us this before, and so I apologize, but you told us that you had never met Travion Smith until that morning.
Never.
So you didn't have any prior knowledge of his demeanor or how he acted or anything like that?
No, I didn't.
Because all of your prior knowledge and relationship was with Ron?
Correct.
I don't have anything other.
Redirect. Mr. McCullum, when Travion Smith came to your house the morning of May 21st, do you recall if he called Ronald at that point?
After we were in the household together, and I told him to put Ron on the phone. So don't call Ron. I don't know what you got to do, but call him. And this is where this conversation came. And I said to Ronald that whatever he's doing, he needs to stop because he's going to go to prison. I told him exactly like that. Travion can back this. And that was the last time I talked to Ronald.
And was there some conversation between either yourself and Ronald or Travion and Ronald at that point regarding the orange laptop at that point, whether or not it was ever going to be brought to you?
It was not going to be brought to me. It had been sold already. It was gone. That's what he told me, that I would not see the orange laptop.
That's what, who told you? Ronald.
Ronald.
Or Travion?
Ronald told me that.
And did you have a conversation with Travion that morning about where the silver laptop came from?
I believe so. He told me somewhere in North Raleigh.
And when did you give Travion Smith the $50 for the laptop?
Pretty much initially when he came in the door, maybe 5-10 minutes after he was in there, I gave him some cash. And we sat down for a moment. He pushed the button on the laptop that I'm looking at right here to reset it, and waited for the laptop to come back up. Once it was good, he left with my fiance and came back.
So you paid him on the first trip?
Yes.
Okay. Before you smoked marijuana?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. McCollum. I don't have any further questions.
Anything further? All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
Any objection to releasing this witness?
No, sir.
Sir, you're released from your subpoena. You're free to go. Thank you. And we'll recess for the afternoon at this time and resume tomorrow morning at 9:30. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you'll please recall all the instructions. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about the case. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters. No conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. If you leave your notepads in your chairs as well as the evidence that's been handed to you, unless the state tells me they're going to be using those in the morning, I'm going to ask the bailiffs to take up that evidence and return it to the state. So those papers may not be in your chairs when you return tomorrow, but your notebooks will, of course. If you'll return at 9:30 tomorrow morning, gather in the deliberation room. Thank you very much for your service. Everyone else, please remain seated while the jurors excuse themselves. The presence of the jury, are there matters that we need to take up before we recess?
Just to give you a forecast on where we are now, we were talking about earlier this morning. Tomorrow we to call Amber Alberts, who is the girlfriend of Ronald Anthony. I anticipate she'll be a lengthier witness, and then 2 witnesses that I do not think will take as long, and then it would be our intent to call Sarah Redden at that point.
So I guess the question was, will we then do a voir dire and send the jury home, or at that point, I guess it may depend what time of day it is?
We'll just have to see what time of day it is. It may be that it sounds like we may get to lunch with the first several witnesses, and just break for lunch early, and we'll just have to see where we are.
Okay, all right, well, thank you.
Anything further?
No, sir.
One other question. I assume, because it may be an issue, I assume Ms. Godwin will be present for both the proffer and the testimony for her?
I've let her know.
Yes.
It would certainly be the state's.
Right.
I here, but
I would certainly like her to be here. So
yes,
if there's any question in her mind whether she needs to be here, if you could let her know that
I'll pass
that she needs to be here. All right, very good. Then we'll be in recess until tomorrow morning at 9:30.